it's mostly a chance to figure out. Also, where are you at the moment? I don't mean like in terms of your institutional affiliation, but more like, it's a year since we planned this program on the Singapore as a logistical surface, the images of Singapore that circulate. That quite. I mean, I'm already punning without intending to, like this idea of the circle, the dot, then circulation, then the globe, and then the global city and so on. But it's been a year since we've discussed these subjects. We've only now kind of realized the seminar program. But I've also noticed that your own interests have shifted,
deviated a little bit.
There are other things that you're like.
Yeah, so I don't want to. So maybe I can begin by just like trying to think of myself independently of, my recent position in SAM, right? So since you're going back a year ago,
Totally.
I think it all still sort of emerges, or I'm still sort of working through essentially things I've long been thinking about since 2016. When I engaged you among others with Concrete Island at NUS. So it really began with sort of me trying to look at Pimpin's film, 80 Kilometers Per Hour, and I've been obsessed with it sort of ever since. And trying to sort of find ways in which to think about that film, and then sort of really sort of coming to terms with how is it that I as a person move around Singapore at the same time. How Singapore is built not just mainly for cars, and my own sort of like bodily frustrations that is, most of us know it's hot here, but sometimes it's so hot that you're at the bus stop waiting for things, and the only thing that you get wind from, because there's so many high rises, right, that's blocking all the winds, and the only kind of wind that you get is the kind of
bus.
is the traffic, right, and I get sort of a bit frustrated, but at the same time amused by this whole condition, right? And then
I used to sit in front of the bus stop as a kid, but where the door will open, so that periodically I get this blast off.
You get sometimes the teaser air, right? I don't know what they call it, the cool breeze. But also sometimes even if you don't have that, it's just the car. Zipping past, and then you get that sort of So it sort of really began from there, and the sheer sort of personal fact that I can't drive. So I'm completely reliant on public transport, and then sort of me thinking around this urban condition of Singapore, and then sort of so it really began from there, and then slowly I think a lot about the cinematic history, since I was thinking about Pimpin's film, right? And then sort of its relationship with the roads, and sort of looking at Rex Cinema itself, before it became this sort of association with, let's say, a South Asian sort of distribution of films. It was the premium sort of destination for any sort of Hollywood blockbuster, and sort of it being located right beside a bus depot, I think it's and then sort of the major roads of Singapore sort of spilling out from there. So I became interested, like the fact that you have a cinema in the sort of mobile center of Singapore in the 40s, and then sort of like allowing all these major roads that stem out of it. So that was the research part within Concrete Island. I became interested, and then from there it sort of gravitated towards like, okay, beyond the sort of relationship that moving images have with the urban form, which is quite well researched, among scholars. Then it became more sort of me looking at just broader movements within Singapore itself, right? How to think of Singapore as a condition of movement itself, the city itself as a condition of movement. And then so that brought me to logistics, essentially, right? And the whole fact that we remember Singapore mostly because it's a key logistical hub, right? But we don't talk about it much in the arts, right? It's like this background things that allow all these events to unfold, but we don't really talk about it, because somehow logistics it's kind of like this. We don't think of it as a culture, right? So I became much more interested in thinking about logistics as a technoculture itself. I felt like there wasn't anyone from here at least actively thinking about it within the arts.
Because even though we think of cities as static kind of coordinates on the globe, they're actually greatly impacted by that kind of logistical logic, especially if you're a port city like ours, right? That's so much of how we do urban planning. Actually is partly to facilitate us as a node.
Yeah.
Right. And as part of a network. So there's a lot of that kind of spatial networking logic that goes into like just our city center, you know, and even the organizations of our traffic patterns.
Yeah,
for sure.
So essentially it's sort of, I think of it essentially as this slow metabolism that I had since like 2016, and then now it's sort of like thinking about, you know, the like last session where I talked about the little red dot, right? And sort of violence in that image. To even now my current research, which is around petrol culture in Singapore, right? The sort of our sort of history being mired in oil. And the roads themselves are, you know, at once being mobilized by oil, but also created through bitumen itself. And so, I think of it essentially, when I look back, it's still sort of me sort of still trying to figure out what is it that in 2016 I felt. And I haven't really had an answer. It's just been this like slow dance around the subject, I guess.
Yeah, but also it's interesting that it got us thinking again about a couple of things. One is like the materialities that are kind of the building blocks of what we think of a city or as an economy. So in one particular case, it's like petrol, right? But the other materiality is the container, the container itself, right? That long shape, where you can be blind to whatever it's inside it, as long as everything inside it fits and it can be moved in that unit. That's all that kind of really matters.
True.
And then and that has so much relations to how we think of the free port. How much? So I mean, I see certain kinds of extensions that go from the logics of those kind of materialities to eventually how we think about just the movement of capital itself. So I think the question is also why I'm doing this extension is to kind of point out where the art could come in. Right? There's the economy of art, right? Which is also like which is where, you know, there is the circulation of art objects through the free port as a form of as quite, you know, it's just a unit of capital. But then there's of course the art that has been concerned with these things in this part of the world. Like we were chatting about the bitumen painting. In Malaysia.
That's right, There's a lot of them actually. Fuad Osman also.
That's right, and even Chitu was just playing off a whole, almost like a lineage by now. It
didn't occur to me until recently actually. But I mean, I haven't spoken to him, so that's one. I don't know. Actually, that's the good question, because I find myself often struggling with it as a curator, because I feel almost like by vocation I need to think about art. And I've had sort of occasions where people sort of ask me, where's the art? Right. And I think it's much more interesting for me to ask you as someone who sort of knows my sort of research and practice, like, where do you think the art can come in? Because that's, I mean, I have my own sort of drafted answer to that, but I think it's much more interesting to hear from someone else.
I mean, for me, I think the Concrete Island was an interesting model that you tried out. Right. Because I think it moved you from thinking historically to moving in a way that with Pimpin's work you were looking back at material that exists, and you were kind of obsessed with it and really super interested in it, and then you wanted to then develop ideas from it. Right? But now with Concrete Island you were looking instead of historically, you were looking in this kind of in the position of the commissioner. You know, you were you were kind of co-creating, co-speculating, you know, with the people that you asked to initiate a different set of related but sometimes extrapolated thinking.
Mm.
So I think that's an interesting model. Like maybe the question about where art exists in this research isn't the fact that it exists, but that it can exist. So you go out and so that's what's interesting for me to see how you will go out and go to someone like, go to an artist and go like, okay,
I'm thinking about these things.
Yeah, think about this thing in relation to the graph. What do you think? Think about it. So I'll be interested to see how what that is like.
Actually, that's a really interesting way to think about it, because I mean, I had this conversation with a mentor recently within Sam, and actually she said that it seems like for me, I have my own sort of interest in research, and then kind of along the way artists gets drawn to my work, and then they come along for the ride, and then they do things kind of beside or along and against it even sometimes. And so she said it might be interesting actually to work with artists who deliberately might resist your narrative. And she thought, she mentioned that this could be a way in which you think about the way you work. Because prior to that, I think I had a lot of sort of anxiety, I guess, about sort of this curatorial identity, because like I'm not, like when I think about things, yes, I think about visual culture at large, but I don't think about, okay, where do the artists come in? So like, but I'm always sort of, at least I like to think of myself as generous with my research, and I like to share with people, and I have no qualms if they.
And you are.
And if they take it and they run, and
but I also think it works for the institution you're in at the moment. Like it's an institution in the midst of.
I hope they hear that.
In the midst of some self-determination, right? It's trying to figure out who it can be, and but it's also already a commissioning institution in the way that, right? It's in charge of the Biennale, which is a commissioning platform.
Yes.
So it has that history and knowledge of what it means to not just collect existing works, but to go and initiate the process of creation.
Yeah.
Right. So it's possible for you to craft out a way of working specifically through these two areas that you're looking at in petroculture and in logistics. Like it made me think, like it's only until the first seminar that it made me think of older work as well. Like I didn't think before. So that was the useful thing about not just talking with you over a year, but actually in the middle of the reading, that I realized that when I was doing master plan, the initial drawing for master plan was just to draw the city out of overlapping circles.
Oh.
So the unitary form for me that was these kind of circles that then constitute a much larger circle. So it got me thinking that actually, so there's the thing that that sometimes I wonder if even you just going to an artist,
right?
There's a process of their own rediscovery of like, oh wait a minute, I think there was something that I could respond to even from previous ways of working.
I never thought about it that way actually.
But have you seen like by now it's been 4 years since the Concrete Island? Were there things that from the project that you really enjoyed? I know you really enjoyed the process of designing the book.
I think a lot about publications, I suppose, because I think that it's a lot less intimidating as compared to an exhibition, I suppose. But were there anything that I think, to be fair, like without sort of pinpointing which content in that book, there were occasions where, if looking back, if I look at that publication in particular, like there were content that obviously I think back and said like, should I have massaged them a little bit more to prod them in directions that I wanted. But then, I think for a while I had that sort of like feeling like, it could have been more sort of streamlined to what I wanted. But at the same time, also now looking back, I kind of accept it as it is. Like, the fact that is how commissions work. I try not to control too much. There was a brief I think I circulated to everyone, and then everyone and the keyword, right, that I gave everyone. Then everyone just kind of ran with it the way they want it.
Yeah.
And yeah,
I saw that as almost like a way of building a lexicon.
Yeah,
so
it
it's
was
a very
it was,
lexicon kind of approach.
It was, yeah.
Yeah. So it's like the way that I feel like the eating chili crab in the Anthropocene work. You know, like you take on certain
certain materials,
right?
You run with it, right?
Yeah. And then what you get is basically a kind of anthology or dictionary effect. But they're also like, I mean, I guess my question is, would you consider is the book form still a primary, like an important way of thinking the development of an idea? And the second way is, you know, are there other things apart from this kind of anthology formats that you can work in developing that kind of book logic? That since then you thought,
Okay, so what hasn't changed is that I still write a lot, and I think I begin with a lot of things through a kind of essay that I sort of write anyway. But I've been thinking a little bit about so whether it needs to even be in a bounded copy. That's one thing that I'm also sort of questioning. So without giving away too many details, since we're still in initial discussions, but back at Sam, we're sort of like don't quote me on this like 1 year or two from now, but we were sort of discussing the possibilities of publication beyond just books and sort of being limited to its codex, right?
Yeah.
But things like, okay, we could do like grey literature, right? We could publish like essays that curators are still sort of working through, and then throw it out as a provocation to most artists. And then, you know, maybe a year from then, if things happen, you know, you sort of come back together with a group of artists and think around that essay. That could be a method of initiating a series of exhibitions or projects. But then also at the same time, I'm also throwing back to the team also the idea that rather than just simply thinking of sort of these sort of grey literature, why not we think about, let's say, publishing in PowerPoint format? Because PowerPoint, like, we can laugh about it, you know, death by PowerPoint or whatever, you know, it is still within bureaucratic sort of discussions, right? Like, it's still the visual currency that we have.
Sure.
Right? It's the tool, whether we like it or not, that we use to convince the fact that, you know, please fund these set of artists.
They're also nice analogies to the PowerPoint. Like there's the video essay.
Yeah, exactly.
Like I really enjoyed some by Triple Canopy.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. Triple Canopy is right. Yeah.
A good relationship between text and image.
Yeah.
Where you can move between kind of like a slide format, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But just based on your pace of your own reading.
Yeah, precisely. I mean, essentially PowerPoint is animation, right? But then so we've been sort of thinking about, like, you know, are there ways in which we could publish in terms of PowerPoint or even Wikipedia pages, right? The way that certain museums like M+ is doing process, right?
Yeah.
Like a kind of
Wikiton.
What do you call it? Yeah, Wikiton, right? Or editathon, right?
Asia Archive is doing it.
Yeah, exactly. So these are things that, you know, I don't want to be quoted on that because, you know, things might change.
Sure. I mean, just even as ideas in the ether, they're great ideas.
Yeah, but so essentially, I think slowly the museum is sort of trying. I said the museum, but I myself also, you know, included in it. We're sort of trying to rethink the way we publish. Because I think that, for instance, if you look at National Gallery, they're doing a great job of publishing all these monographs, and I think they need to be there. But whether or not these formats need to be the only...
No, of course not.
Yeah.
I think the field has room for plenty more.
Yeah, essentially,
So the institutional field has room for plenty more.
Yeah, exactly. And also because we know that, for instance, different ways of publishing engages with different segments of the audience, right? Like, you wouldn't have, like, look, if I bring my mom to a show at NGS, she might enjoy looking at the painting, but she will definitely not buy the book, right? And so then how are there ways in which we could sort of engage with different audiences through different publications to say that, you know, there are different values in certain things that we do? So a podcast might be good for people who just want to, you know, engage with art on the train ride to work, right? So things like that, or whether, you know, we could have a kind of Netflix-ish kind of publication format for video essays that we work with artists, for instance, things like that. That perhaps some people think might be a bit more towards like what what's the platform again? This, right?
Right.
Yeah, something that this does, right? Towards that kind of format, or but I think we're still sort of as a team we're sort of like working around it. But personally, coming back to myself, then yeah, lately I still write a lot, but I've been beginning to question myself if this should be the primary and only way in which I work, because I realize that not everyone dwell within textual landscapes, right? Not everyone think through metaphors, and so yeah, these are things that I've been thinking about, but I really don't have a good answer for.